So it's a real pleasure, and I'm so grateful that you've come here, because this is a wonderful book and it's such a rare chance to hear Austrian writers here. So thank you very much for coming. They have sorted it all out themselves, so I will say very little. I want to thank the Austrian Cultural Forum, who is supporting, the Bachmann Center has been supporting and is supporting us. Also, this series is convened by Godela Weiss-Sussex from the IMLR. She's not here now, but she has conceived it, and I think there were already 20 or so encounters between writers and translators. And I want to thank Tess Lewis, who is not here, but who has actually kickstarted this and will come herself with Andrea Grill in April. And I'm so grateful to her for having read this book, because it's a fantastic text. And I'll just hand over to you. We said that they will introduce each other rather than me, because there is a story behind how Elisabeth Lauffer has actually come to translate Anna's book. So I think I will just sit down now and hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Soll ich anfangen? Okay. I'm Elisabeth Lauffer. I have been working now with Anna Weidenholzer for the last 5 or so years. I'm a literary translator based in the US, and 2015 is when Anna and I first met. Anna had been invited to participate in the Festival Neue Literatur, which is a showcase of German new literature from the German-speaking world, from Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, that's held in New York City every year. And that year, Tess Lewis, whom Andrea just mentioned, was curating. And I was still very new on the scene, and it was in fact my first paid translation to translate. So Anna helped put bread on the table that year. I translated an excerpt from Anna's first novel, which was published in 2012, I believe. 2012. Winter is Good for Fish. And that began our work together. The friendship took a little bit longer because I was too scared to say hi. My partner Isaac and I went to a reading where Anna was presenting, and the presentation ended, and I wanted to go straight for the door, and because I was intimidated and a bit nervous, and Isaac stopped me and made me say hello, and I think I said hi, and then went to the door. But
then we met again.
Yes.
Like 1 year after, I think. Yeah, I was in New York for a residency, and Liz came to a reading, to my reading, and I was so impressed because I think you were driving for 6 hours, and there was a huge snowstorm, and I think like 5 hours later, entire Manhattan was shut down and nobody could get out anymore, but you managed to...
Yes. I think that was the year, it was called Snowmageddon, and I was in New York for about 2.5 hours and then left. But so I got to hear Anna read and had dinner together with her and her husband Christian, and that was really nice. And finally we talked. Finally we talked. And throughout I was very interested in Anna's work and kept sort of asking for short stories to translate. I had a short story that we'll actually talk about a little bit later, published in an online journal called No Man's Land. And then last year, we applied for a joint residency together in New York State at an institute called Art Omai. And we were there for 10 days, and we were working on a translation from her previous novel called Why the Men Are Wearing Starfish. She's got really great titles. And that was also for me a really important time, not just for us to get to know each other, but for me to start learning about some of the idiosyncrasies of Austrian German, and Austrian culture.
Austrian food.
Austrian food. Yeah, that was a big topic.
Yeah.
And that inspired me then to apply for another residency to go to Austria. And I then spent 2 months this past summer with the Artists in Residence program through the Bundeskanzleramt and Kulturkontakt, a cultural organization. And that was where we started working together on this book.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's our story.
Yeah. I hope it will lead to a wonderful publication.
Yes.
Yeah. Shall we read now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to read a bit in German. It's the very first chapter of the book, and
There are handouts.
yeah, there are handouts.
Does everybody have?
And maybe it's easier for you to understand if you know that's a dream. So Elisabeth just wakes up and has this sentence in her head, and then she just starts thinking about her relationship, about her neighborhood, about everything surrounding her, and I think we talk about the rest later.
Mhm.
So I'm going to read in German. It starts at 1:18 Uhr. Wir müssen das Trocknen von Wüsten auf später verschieben. Mit diesem Satz liege ich neben dir. Ich schlage die Decke zurück, deine Hand auf deinen Brustkorb, als ob du schwören würdest. Ich habe Sand gesehen, Sand, der das ganze Haus hier füllen könnte und das Nachbarhaus noch dazu, vom 4. Stockwerk bis ins Erdgeschoss. Er würde nach unten rieseln, bis er oben angekommen ist. Woher ich weiß, wie viel Sand das war? Du hast den Kopf zur Seite gedreht. Ich sehe deine Augenlider nicht, deine Wimpern, deine Nase, deinen Mund. Aber ich kenne dich auf der anderen Seite des Bettes. Ich weiß, welche Fragen du stellen würdest, und ich weiß, wie viel Sand es braucht, um das alles hier zuzuschütten. Die Wüste war groß genug, so groß, dass der Mensch darin kleiner als ein Streichholz wirkte. Wir müssen das Trocknen von Wüsten auf später verschieben, sagte sie mit einem Föhn in der Hand. Sie ging einen Schritt zurück und schaute in die Ferne. Wüsten? Wiederholte ich und schüttelte den Kopf. Aber wir haben doch gerade noch Wurst gemacht, wir waren dabei, den Darm zu füllen. Es sollte die beste Wurst im Umkreis von 125 Kilometern werden. Erinnern Sie sich nicht? Ich wollte meine Hände an der Schürze abwischen, die ich umgebunden hatte, aber da war kein weißer Stoff mehr. Ich trug einen schönen Anzug und auch Sie. Wir sehen aus wie die feinen Herren, dachte ich. Das ist ein Aufzug, in dem man einer Präsidentin begegnet, aber keinem Darm. Es muss mehr von uns geben, hörte ich mich sagen. Es braucht einfach mehr von uns. Sie schwieg, aber es war keine unangenehme Stille. Es war die Stille eines Nachmittags im Park, wo Hunde Bälle jagen und Krähen über die Wiese hüpfen und vielleicht auch weit oben ein Flugzeug fliegt. Eine große Ruhe, die pausenlos in Bewegung ist. Sie stand dicht neben mir, sie nickte. Dann zog sie das Kabel aus dem Stecker, sie wickelte es um den Föhn. Achtung, wollte ich noch sagen, manche Hersteller raten davon ab. Und da sah ich es. Ein weites Land, unheimlich viel Sand und am Horizont ein Gefühl von hier.
Und wir zeigen jetzt den Text, ja? I'll now read my translation, the final draft as it now stands of this section. And we thought it might be interesting for people to see there are some misconceptions about translation and how it works, and it's just a one-to-one, right? So we wanted to give a little bit of insight into the process and what it looks like. Here we go. So this was the first draft, and this was the first meeting that Anna and I had to discuss the text. So I'll read what it turned into, and then we'll open the discussion also. We do want this to be interactive as much as people want it to be, and we'll talk about some of the real challenges in this work. 1:18. We need to put off drying the deserts till later. I lie beside you with this line. I throw back the covers, and your hand is on your chest, as though you were taking an oath. I saw sand, enough sand to fill the whole building here and the neighbor's building too, from the fifth story to the ground floor. It would pour down till it reached the top. And how do I know how much sand it was? You've turned your head to the side, and I can't see your eyelids, your eyelashes, your nose, your mouth. But I know you, there on the other side of the bed. I know the questions you would ask, and I know how much sand it would take to fill this all up. The desert was big, so big that any person found there would seem smaller than a matchstick. We need to put off drying the deserts till later, she said, a blow dryer in her hand. She took a step back and looked into the distance. Wüsten, I repeated, deserts, and shook my head. But we were just making Würste. We were filling the casing. It was going to be the best sausage in a 75-mile radius. Don't you remember? I wanted to wipe my hands on the apron I'd put on, but the white fabric was gone, and I was wearing a nice suit, as was she. We look like high society, I thought. This is clothing for meeting a president, unsuited for intestines. There need to be more of us, I heard myself say. There just have to be more of us. She didn't say anything, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the hush of an afternoon in the park, dogs chasing balls and crows hopping about the green, and maybe even an airplane flying high above, a great piece that is ceaselessly in motion. She stood close beside me. She nodded. Then she pulled the plug. She wrapped the cord around the blow dryer. Careful, I wanted to tell her. Some manufacturers advise against that. And then I saw it, a distant land, an awful lot of sand, and, on the horizon, a feeling of here. Yeah. Maybe we should start with one of the most glaringly difficult. Wüsten and Würsten. So this was my notebook when I first picked up this text, and I thought, oh, Lord, how am I going to do this? Because
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I think most of the things like Wurst and Wüste is basically on the first 10 pages.
Yeah.
You had to translate, so
yeah,
it was a bit tricky for you.
It was, and this was also a sample, the first 20 pages or so, that I was preparing for Anna's publisher, Mattes and Seitz, in Berlin, because it's standard that when a text is published in Germany, Austria, elsewhere, the publishers will often ask for a short sample in English that they send around the world, basically, with the marketing materials for the book in an effort to sell the rights, so that other countries will buy the rights and have the book translated. So I needed to make a really good impression with this text because it's essentially sales material, and so there was quite a lot of extra pressure to get these right. So, Wurst, sausage, but plural, sausages, which is why the umlaut is there, Würste, and Wüste meaning desert. Of course, the first question was, could you somehow do dessert and desert? But then there's this lovely image of the intestines. Yeah. So that was tough. As you can all see, even here, I didn't really have any ideas for how to address this. And I think, yeah, even from the first draft, it felt like a situation in which we had to find a way to keep the German there. And it's tough to, of course, you want to have as few italicized words on a page as possible, because it's a visual cue where a lot of readers will kind of shut off or think, well, I want this to be in a language that I really understand. And so we thought that it might be a nice idea to have the words there, and then employing this little aside right here that then continues with the Würste, and obviously on a Word document it's going to look different than it will on a book page, but having the words in such close proximity would just give that visual cue to the reader that, okay, this was a play on words in the original. It's a weird image in German too, though, right?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. But it's also very important for the entire text, because Wüste, Würste is so close, like only the R is missing, and I think the entire text is a lot about misunderstandings, about how we talk to each other, how we don't talk to each other. So it was very, very important for me to keep this image somehow, and to have it in there.
Yeah, and I felt that. Should we maybe move? I feel like I can't see this out of the room. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I felt also that worst is a word that is kind of common enough in English, at least. I have no idea how this would be translated in other languages, but I felt that it's a word that's become common enough in English that, of course, then it's very tricky because the plural, it looks different. It's got the umlaut, it's got an E at the end. It really complicates matters, but there, I was able to employ, we've got context, we're filling the casing, we were making Würste, it was going to be the best sausage. So this is something that we often do in translation, one of these so-called stealth glosses, where you figure out a way to work in an explanation into the text without being heavy-handed, without having some subordinate clause where you say, which means sausages, something like that, to give a clue to the reader as to what's happening. So we thought this was a good solution. Don't know how everyone else feels about it, but that was ultimately what we landed on. And then.
So can I?
Yeah, of course.
I think that's an elegant solution. But I was also wondering, my German isn't that great, but in the first sentence there's also würdest. Would that be considered part of the same play on words?
Als ob du schwer würdest, well, no, but no.
I just want.
But it's pretty close.
Yeah, it is very close. It is very close.
But from the sound,
The sound
würdest.
is,
Yeah.
Yeah. Since Robert interrupted, I was just
Yeah,
wondering, I mean, when I started reading the novel, I thought, oh, this is going to be so difficult. But it's not, it does not go on like this. So before I start explaining, I was just wondering if anybody is wondering what's happening here, or who is actually speaking, and if you would like to ask some questions. Because obviously there's ich, and that's, a novel starts with somebody saying ich, that's pretty standard, but then there's sie, who is sie. So it's very bewildering. Does anybody, is it possible to work out just from the passage?
I mean, short answer no, I wasn't wondering what's happening, yes.
That's the same, because you do not understand this unless you keep reading for it. And it changes completely after a few pages and becomes very realist.
Yeah.
So it's a very hard way of getting people started. And I mean, it's a beautiful novel, but this only becomes clear, even though it's an important motif, at almost the end, who she is.
But it's also like, it's part of the structure of the novel, because everything is like somehow dreamlike. She wakes up, she's not sure where she is or what her life is about, and everything just gets clearer and clearer during the night. So I think this confusion is also a structural confusion, you could say,
So it's a dream, and and she's waking from a dream, and C is somebody who later comes into the story as an actual person, but is now in her dream. But it's not, not a very difficult text to read on the whole. It's absolutely beautifully done, how the few hours of the night are interspersed with the whole story of a few years of the narrator's love and friendship with a man called Peter. And it's not a hard text, but it's a very hard entry to it.
I think that's the beauty with beginnings where you don't really know, but it's strong enough to really, you're ready to go on a journey. And I guess I appreciate texts like that, when books start like that, because then I'm ready to go. Exactly, it's really a teaser, and it's great.
Should we go to the more?
But I think if people read a lot, I'm sure they know Germany connected with Rus. I think even if you put a fiction about Rus, that a lot of competent readers would know what it means. And I don't know how you're drying off a dessert there. Off a dessert.
And the sand wouldn't make sense either.
There seems to be a strange definition for my liking.
Well, it's a dream passage, so it's an association, and first everything seems to be turned round. The sand fills up from, when you pour it from above, it fills up from the bottom, but why is there sand? Sand becomes sausage, and then there's a woman with a hair dryer.
So what you mean, from a dream, she slowly wakes up and gets back into reality to deal with her life.
Like her life, her neighborhood, her relationship. And it's like also like this double sense of awakening. Like the one time she just wakes up and she realizes, okay, I stop thinking, can't sleep anymore, and the other part is like waking up from your life or from your dreams or whatever.
Do you later explain the state of her mind?
Somehow. I would not say like really explain, because everything is very subtle and it's just like in the background. But I would say it is explained in the text. I don't know what your feeling is about that, but
it does. It does take time, and it is this interesting narrative framework of each of these times throughout the night, this sleepless night, and getting to know time is very fluid, and I am guessing that everyone here has had a sleepless night before, and that kind of strange state in between sleep and waking, and your memories and the voices of the people who constitute your life. And it's one of the very interesting stylistic features in this book that, as a translator, it was one of the questions I was discussing with Anna earlier, that many of the sections where Elisabeth, the first person narrator, although sometimes it also goes into third person, when Elisabeth is remembering scenes from her life with her partner Peter, there are no quotation marks around any of the conversations. And it can sometimes be really hard to tell who's talking, if it is actually dialogue or if it's moved suddenly from dialogue into narration. And we were discussing this earlier. I recently read Normal People by Sally Rooney, and she also doesn't have any quotation marks. And it was interesting because I was speaking with an American friend who's a very good reader. She reads a lot. She reads fast too, and I had read this book and I was really excited about it, and she had just started reading it too, and she sent me a text message saying, "There are no quotation marks." It's really slowing me down. I don't know who's speaking, and it's interesting for me to think about translating this book, and I wouldn't dare. I would never introduce quotation marks, because then there are sections, and certainly you can describe these sections too, that are then told in present tense, and all of a sudden there are quotation marks where it's very clear who is speaking. And so it's interesting too, thinking about dream, thinking about memory, and the way the things people say are represented in our minds and on the page.
Yeah. And how the story is told.
Yeah.
Because there are chapters, I think it's about 7 or so, they always start with what this home is. So it's in the third person, it's in the present tense, quotation marks. And then the story gets very clear and you have the impression that somebody just tells you the story in a very clear sense. And then in between there are the chapters with the time titles. And there it somehow gets fragile, or it's just not clear who is speaking. Elisabeth is telling the story, and basically it's like changing between those two structures and the way of telling the story, and about it's also about the question how do we tell a story, or or what is the strongest story maybe of a life, or the one that stays.
There's also a beautiful balance between the dream chapters and the home.
Yeah.
It's all set in a house where a lot of people can see into each other's apartments, and the number of characters is quite small, and so when they encounter, they're also often very funny. But
Wollen wir nächste Szene lesen?
So I'm going to read a bit in German again. Is that here? Right here? Yeah. Geht's in den Schreibplatz auch?
That may not be on the handout.
I don't think so.
But I think we have the translation. And this is the chapter where Peter and Elisabeth meet their neighbors, Carla and Heinz, for the first time. And the chinchilla.
So they've just moved in, haven't they?
They've just moved in.
Into
It's their first
an
visit,
apartment
and,
block.
They get to know each other. Ja. 1:30 Uhr. Ich zünde ein Streichholz an, 2 Flammen, die sich spalten, wie lange bis die erste den Finger verbrennt. Füße wie Eis, noch eine kalte Nacht, es sollte längst wärmer sein. Ein zweites, ich halte es dicht über meine Hand. Bei Feuer im Bett herrscht große Gefahr, du bewegst dich nicht. Nur eines noch. Im Fenster die Spiegelung der Flamme und dahinter kaum zu erkennen mein Gesicht. Dich sehe ich nicht. Es ist dunkel hier, nur eine Wohnung ist erleuchtet, 3. Stock, die ersten 2 Fenster von links. Küche und Wohnbereich. Carla lässt oft die Lichter an und sie ist die Letzte, die hier schlafen geht. Carla und Heinz, ihr Mann, auch er wirkt, als ob er in den meisten Nächten keinen Schlaf finden könnte. Da ist zu wenig Bewegung drin. Ich schlage die Decke zurück und trete ans Fenster heran. Nur das Flackern des Fernsehers und davor eine Gestalt. Es ist ein unaufgeregtes Spiel. Ich kenne eure Fenster Und ich kenne eure Sätze. Carla ist nicht zu sehen und Heinz sitzt schon wieder still. Gut möglich, dass er eingeschlafen ist. Dreh dich, beweg dich doch. So ist es gut. Er hebt den Arm und legt ihn langsam wieder ab, den Kopf in Richtung Badezimmer gewandt. Spricht er mit ihr? Nein, ich sehe Carla nicht. Niemand am Fenster, niemand, der herüberschaut, obwohl sie beide wissen, dass es dazu nicht viel bedarf. Den Kopf kurz heben, besser vorher noch einen Schritt an das Fensterbrett heran, die Hände locker darauf ablegen. Man spürt die Wärme des Heizkörpers dann gleich. Carla, du weißt doch, wie es geht. Lasst mich nicht allein in dieser Nacht. Kalt ist es geworden in den letzten Tagen, kühler als vor ein paar Wochen noch. Carla wird wieder eingeheizt haben, obwohl es absolut nicht notwendig sei, wie Heinz betonen würde. Sie wird sagen, Novak, schließ das Fenster, mich friert schon so. Wie damals, als wir zum ersten Mal auf Besuch gewesen sind. Der Rauch stand in der Luft, aber sie sagte, lasst das Fenster zu, ich komme mit eurem Rauch gut zurecht. Euer Rauch, sagte sie, obwohl sie selbst doch die ganze Zeit nichts anderes tat. Heinz, beweg dich doch, hol Carla her. So bei den ganzen Abend die Wand anstarrte. Ich weiß, sie haben den Fernseher dort angebracht. Ich weiß, die Wohnung sieht jetzt anders aus. An unserem ersten gemeinsamen Abend war es noch ein Röhrengerät. Es lief ohne Ton im Hintergrund. Carla und Heinz gingen in regelmäßigen Abständen zum Balkon und holten die Plastikflaschen mit vorab gemischten Cola Rot herein. Es war Februar, sie kühlten draußen gut. Warum sie Getränke vorab mischen, ich verstehe es bis heute nicht. Auf mein Nachfragen antwortete Carla an jenem Abend, komme ich vom Einkaufen nach Hause, habe ich das lieber gleich erledigt. Nachher fehlt mir die Kraft dazu. Und ich lachte, weil Heinz lachte und Peter auch. Die Kraft, um Rotwein mit Cola zu mischen, wiederholte er. Aber Carla schaute nur zum Fernseher, wo eine Werbung für ein Fitnessgerät lief. Ein Mann stand auf einer Vibrationsplatte, er zwinkerte in die Kamera. Ich trinke Wein auch gern ohne Cola, sagte ich. Ihr müsst euch keine Umstände machen. Doch Heinz, dieses Mal stand er auf und nicht Carla. Heinz hatte schon die Balkontür geöffnet und Peter starrte mit Carla auf den Mann im Fernseher, bis sie sagte, sie glaube das nicht. Wir blieben lange an diesem Abend. Wir tranken viel, uns allen wurden vom Rotwein die Lippen blau. Zum Glück haben wir nicht weit hinüber. Heinz ließ das Chinchilla frei und wir sprachen darüber, was dieses Zuhause ist, in dem wir noch die Neuen waren. Ich würde sorgfältig prüfen, in welche Wohnung ich ziehe, sagte er und zwinkerte Carla zu, was seltsam aussah, weil er seinen Mund dabei öffnete. Du bist doch nur Versicherungsvertreter, sagte Carla. Alles, was du überprüfen kannst, sind Nummerntafeln, ob sie schon vergeben sind. Gut zu wissen, sagte Peter. Warum? Wir besitzen doch kein Auto, sagte ich. Dann war es eine Weile still, Carla trank einen Schluck und Heinz blickte dem Chinchilla nach, bis Peter lachte. Hättet ihr das wirklich gedacht? Es ist gut, seine Nachbarn kennenzulernen, antwortete Carla schließlich. Meine Augen brannten vom Rauch. Ich ging hinaus auf den Balkon und schaute zu uns hinüber. Peter hatte das Licht im Schlafzimmer vergessen, die Glühbirne hing von der Decke. Wir hätten längst eine Lampe kaufen sollen, aber es war schwer, sich zu einigen, vor allem wenn einer helles Licht bevorzugt und die andere nicht. Vorläufig sieht es aus, dachte ich, ein Leben, das noch eingerichtet werden muss. Ich hielt mich am Geländer fest, streckte den Rücken durch und kühlte anschließend das Gesicht mit meinen kalten Händen. Wir hatten nicht erzählt, dass wir uns ein Auto teilten, dass es mir überflüssig erschien, zwei zu haben. Ich hörte die Stimmen von drinnen, hörte, wie sie sich über Fahrzeuge unterhielten. Wahrscheinlich ging es darum, welche Farbe im Straßenverkehr am sichersten sei, eines von Peters Lieblingsthemen in dieser Zeit. Alle haben wir einen Grund, warum wir uns für eine Wohnung entscheiden, sagte ich, als ich wieder zurück ins Zimmer kam. Möchtest du nach Hause, Prinzessin? Murmelte Peter. Es ist spät geworden. Kaiserin, sagte ich, oder zumindest Königin. Das Chinchilla, rief Heinz, und ich weiß noch genau, Carla begann in diesem Moment das Etikett von der Cola-Rot-Flasche zu kratzen. Sie rollte das Papier zu kleinen Kugeln, sie steckte eine in den Mund und kaute daran. Novak, sagte Heinz, hör auf damit. Wir entschieden uns für die Wohnung, weil es hier sehr viel zu sehen gibt, sagte ich. Ich mag es, wenn ich vor dem Fenster Bewegung habe. Nur ein Blick in die Landschaft wäre mir nicht genug. Ich brauche das Rauschen der Stadt. Und Carla lachte. Sie lachte laut und hustete, als sie eine Papierkugel verschluckte. Ich hole noch eine Flasche, sagte Heinz. Ihr habt nicht weit. Das hier ist doch keine Stadt, sagte Carla schließlich und steckte eine weitere Papierkugel in den Mund. Peter sah auf die Uhr, währenddessen holte Carla tief Luft und spuckte ihm die Kugel ins Gesicht.
And now I'll read the translation of the same scene, because there were quite a few little spots there.
Can I say one thing? It might be easier for people.
Yeah.
So the neighbors are called Karl and Heinz Novak, and they are referred to in the narration as Carla and Heinz, but they call each other Novak. So
Yes.
Novak can be either. So, it makes it easier to understand.
Yes. 1:30. I light a match, and the flame splits in two. How long till the first burns my finger? Feet like ice. Another cold night. It should have warmed up by now. Then a second. I hold it right above my hand. Fire in bed is very risky. You don't move. Just one more. The flame reflected in the window, and behind it, barely perceptible, my face. I can't see you. It's dark here. Only one apartment is lit up. 4th floor, first 2 windows on the left, kitchen and living area. Carla often leaves the lights on, and she's always the last to go to bed around here. Carla and Heinz, her husband, it seems he, too, doesn't get much sleep most nights. There's too little movement over there. I throw off the covers and go over to the window, only the flickering of the TV, and in front of it, a figure. It's an unexciting game. I know your windows, and I know the things you say. Carla is nowhere to be seen, and Heinz is sitting motionless again. There's a good chance he's fallen asleep. Turn already, just move. There you go. He lifts his arm and slowly lowers it back down, his head turned toward the bath. Is he talking to her? No, I can't see Carla. No one by the window, no one looking over, although they both know it doesn't take much. Lift your head for a second, or better yet, first take a step toward the windowsill, lightly place your hands on it. You can feel the warmth of the radiator immediately. Carla, you know how. Don't leave me alone tonight, you two.
Do you want to move that?
Oh,
It helps.
Sure. It's gotten cold the last few days, even chillier than a few weeks ago. Carla will have turned on the heat again, although completely unnecessary, as Heinz will have said, and then she'll say, Novak, close the window. I'm freezing as it is. Like that first time we went for a visit, the air was filled with smoke, but she said, keep the window shut. I'm fine with your smoke. Your smoke, she said, although she herself had done nothing else the entire time. Heinz, for God's sake, move. Get Carla to come in. As if he were staring at the wall all night. I know they've mounted the television there. I know the apartment looks different now. On that first evening together, it had still been a tube TV, and it ran on mute in the background. At regular intervals, Carla and Heinz went out onto the balcony to fetch plastic bottles of pre-mixed Cola Red. It was February, and they stayed nice and cold outside. Why they mix their drinks beforehand remains unclear to this day. That evening, in response to my question, Carla answered, when I get home from shopping, I'd rather get it over with right away. I don't have the energy to later. And I laughed, because Heinz laughed, and so did Peter. The energy to mix red wine and cola, he repeated. But Carla simply gazed at the television, where an ad was playing for a workout machine. A man stood on a vibration plate and waved at the camera. I like wine without cola too, I said. You don't need to bother. But Heinz, this time he got up, not Carla. Heinz had already opened the door to the balcony, and Peter was staring at the man on television, and Peter was staring at the man on television with Carla, until she said she didn't believe that. We stayed for a long time that night. We drank a lot. Our lips all turned purple from the red wine. At least we don't have far to go. Heinz let the chinchilla out, and we talked about what this home was, where we were still the newcomers. I would check things out carefully before moving in anywhere, he said, winking at Carla, which looked strange because he opened his mouth when he did it. You're just an insurance agent, said Carla. The only thing you can check out is license plates to see if the numbers are already taken. Good to know, said Peter. Why? We don't even own a car, I said. Then it was quiet for a minute. Carla took a sip, and Heinz watched the chinchilla, till Peter laughed. Would you actually have believed that? It's good to meet your neighbors, Carla eventually responded. The smoke made my eyes burn. I went out onto the balcony and looked over at our place. Peter had forgotten the light in the bedroom. The bulb hung from the ceiling. We really should have bought a fixture by that point, but it was hard to agree on one, especially when he preferred bright light and she didn't. Looks temporary, I thought. A life that still needs to be set up. I held onto the railing, stretched my back, then cooled my face with my cold hands. We hadn't told them that we shared a car, that I thought it unnecessary to have too. I heard the voices inside, heard something about cars. They were probably talking about which colors are safest in traffic, one of Peter's favorite topics at the time. We all have our reasons for choosing an apartment, I said, when I came back into the room. Do you want to go home, Princess? Peter murmured. It's late. Empress, I said, or at the very least, Queen. The chinchilla, Heinz exclaimed, and I still remember that at that moment, Carla began picking at the label on the plastic bottle of Cola Red. She rolled up tiny wads of the paper, then put one in her mouth and began to chew. Novak, Heinz said, cut that out. We chose this apartment because there's so much to see here, I said. I like having activity outside my window. Just a view of a landscape wouldn't be enough for me. I need the noise of the city. And Carla laughed. She laughed out loud and began to cough as the paper wad lodged in her throat. I'll grab another bottle, Heinz said. You don't have far to go. This is hardly a city, Carla eventually said, and stuck another wad in her mouth. Peter looked up at the clock, and as he did, Carla took a deep breath and shot the spitball in his face.
Yeah. I think in here is one of the things we discussed the most. It's Cola Rot in German. So basically, Cola Rot is when you mix Coke with red wine.
It was a very popular drink.
It was really popular, yeah.
And it's a drink that I've heard that I had heard of before, but known as calimocho, the Spanish version of it, which felt like absolutely the wrong term to use here, to take a clearly Spanish term, and that was something I learned about as a teenager in the early 2000s. There isn't a clear time when this is taking place, and it's in Austria, and
Carla and Heinz would never say
that.
In Austria and Germany, it's a class drink as well. Is it a bit sort of
maybe, yeah?
Or was it just a fashion? When I was
young,
young,
a certain
people,
age, yeah.
I think it's a bit like hooch, maybe. That's popular here, isn't it? I mean, alcoholic lemonade.
Maybe I can drink. I'm no expert.
Yeah, it's when you start drinking, it's very, it doesn't taste like alcohol so much, and it's
but you
cheap.
get very drunk.
Yeah.
And
a cider is maybe the sociological equivalent.
Yeah, and specific foods are always really tricky to translate.
Malakoff-Torte.
Malakoff-Torte is
I'll show pictures now, but I don't know if it's...
I think that it would help.
Yeah. Because I'm not sure if even people who live in Germany understand Malakoff-Torte. something very typical Austrian.
Named after some Russian fürst.
Yeah.
And you know, the question is always, you know, do you keep the word again? Do you try to introduce one of these stealth glosses with Malakoff taught it? I haven't gotten to that section in the text yet, so I don't know if I would then say the cream-based cake, or you know, try to kind of work a description.
More than cream-based. Cream
and rum and ladyfingers and all sorts of good things. But with the Cola Red, and especially, and this is something too, I'm not sure how it might be different in British English too. In the US, we don't really say cola that much. If anything, it's Coke. Yeah.
That sounds so hard.
You wouldn't say cola either.
Have you never tried it?
No.
But then too, that's Coke is, it's also a trademark thing, and I imagine them drinking a generic cola that you buy in 1.5 liters, is, you know, the tall bottles.
But you think Americans would understand Cola Red?
Well, so that's the question too. This is not published yet. Because as you can see at first, when the Cola Red is first mentioned, I already included this little explanation, the pre-mixed cola and red wine. But then, down here, in the original as well, they actually say, the energy, they do explain what is in a Cola Red, which is not a very complicated recipe. And since this drink is then, the term Cola Red comes up, I don't know, maybe at least twice later in this scene, we thought, well, maybe we'll introduce this as just the name of this cocktail, it's not, this mixed drink. Mm-hmm. We'll kind of establish that this is what it's called. We've explained what the mixture is.
Yeah, so the people in the States can mix it and make some money.
Yeah.
It's much more tricky than you first think, because I didn't, as an Austrian reader, to have Coke and red wine and Malakoff Porter is a very clear semantic field. It's a sort of small town people, and you make this slightly sickly cake for a special occasion. So I never thought, I mean, you know, as an American or English person, you would have a completely different sense of context from.
Not only that, if I read the narrator saying, I like wine without cola too, if you said that in this country, that would be a polite way of saying, please don't put it. But I'm sensing that might not be that's not right.
Yeah.
Does she mean that literally? Right?
She is probably not an experienced drinker. This is a horrible combination.
But what you
Rum and Coca-Cola, that's beautiful.
But what you said is interesting, because it would imply different social sort of stratas, you know, that Elisabeth and Peter at home would rather drink, you know, Sauvignon Blanc or something. But I think they are of a similar social sort of.
Yeah. So Elisabeth prefers beer, but
but so they're not sort of put out by the offer of cola.
No.
But the whole feel of it is much harder to translate than I would have imagined.
Yeah.
And there too, I sort of read that as Elisabeth not doesn't want to trouble them, is trying to ingratiate herself a bit with them, is trying to make new friends with the neighbors, but then it really is no trouble, because either it's pre-mixed or it's pretty straightforward to prepare.
Cola red wine.
Cola red wine. Too bad we've only got cola we've only got wine and sparkling water.
We can't taste it here because you haven't got the Coca-Cola.
I should have, I didn't think.
Little try.
What about the chinchilla? I mean, that is a strange pet to have. What
It is, yeah.
What did you intend with the chinchilla?
What do I intend? I don't know. It's always the question when you write a text. Somehow things pop up, and it was just like there were Carla and Heinz, and it was absolutely clear that there has to be a chinchilla. I don't know. I can't explain it, but it's yeah.
Because I had all sorts of associations, and now that I have the author in front of me, they might be completely wrong. Because I thought they have a pretty bad marriage, and Heinz is completely obsessed with this chinchilla. And a chinchilla is a sort of exotic choice that sort of symbolizes I don't know what, but very much, and it's a very fragile situation. And when the chinchilla gets lost, everything is.
Yeah,
but
and at the same time, he's also very cruel to his chinchilla.
Yeah.
Yeah, he tries to make the chinchilla drink
wine. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
And then
it's another occasion. Yeah.
there's another
White wine without any coke. Yeah.
Who has written about someone who believes that by breeding chinchillas she will make a lot of money. I mean, it's an immigrant. And I was just wondering whether in German literature generally there's a
chinchilla thing.
PhD.
Of course it doesn't happen. I think they will die, but
Yeah.
I think about the chinchilla. I mean, if you had a certain kind of dog that can signify something, or something like a rat or a ferret could mean that you are kind of,
Yeah. I mean, there's one thing about
but the chinchilla is difficult to
it's very
pin down.
Yeah. And it's also a pet you just have inside your flat. You don't take it out for a walk or something. And it's also. I mean, the chinchilla lives in a cage next to the TV, and that's also, somehow, I don't know, has a link to the relationship between Carla and Heinz, like being in this cage and everything. At one point, the TV is too heavy, and the shelf just crashes down, and so. There is a link.
No, the chinchilla does not. No chinchillas were harmed in the writing of this story.
And no swans.
No swans.
The animals, yeah. Did you want to say something? Sorry.
It's not going to be chinchilla related.
Neither is this. I wanted to ask about metaphor, because that first sentence sounded to me like it might be metaphorical, about dry deserts. But you just said something else that sounded like there were metaphorical dimensions. Is that a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it gets clearer if you read the book, but I just like starting with a sentence that doesn't make any sense at the very first time you read it, so that you maybe open a wider field of connotations, or just to also like to leave things open to the reader, just to tell as little as possible with opening a wider field.
That's similar to I think I read the translated extract that Liz did for your first book, when translated for Fishes. And that extract, I don't know if that's what opens the book, but it's very disorientating. Don't really know what's going on. There's something about a small animal in a box in a microwave. Or
It's a frog in the fridge.
So, I don't know if that's a theme to sort of alienate the reader from the meaning of what's happening.
Maybe, yeah. The frog,
Otto.
Yeah, he dies in the fridge.
And there is also a very clear trajectory to the novel. That's a question, really, that, I mean, Elisabeth very soon realizes that there are quite a few things she doesn't like about Peter. They don't like the same colors. She doesn't like hiking. He likes hiking. But he also seems to change or maybe reveal himself as quite right-wing. Is that?
Yeah.
Did you want to actually give or send a political message?
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, it's about this relationship, which might not be the best relationship in the world. And what interested me was the question, where's the point where it might, I don't know, where Elisabeth realizes the things that are happening around her in very tiny steps, and that her environment is just changing and the political situation is changing, and it's not coming in big steps but in very tiny steps. And so that's also in the novel, like how your surroundings change. And
I mean, there's increasing xenophobia. And do you want to present this as a sort of image of what's happening in Austria?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. That was also the idea of writing the book. Yeah.
Sorry, I've just got a question. Did you find that you had to read the book several times before you translated it, so that you picked up on all the metaphor, or you started translating it and then you went back and thought, oh right, I needed to translate particular words in a certain way?
Yeah, it's been, when I did the sample, it had to be done in a week or so, and so I didn't have time to read the whole book beforehand. So, in fact, the Z, the formal U, that comes up on the first page, I had no idea who that was, and I was also very disoriented. And it is then, I'm pleased that I can come back to this, and I haven't actually seen anything glaring where I think, oh God, I just had no idea what I was writing about at that point. But certainly, it's happened with other texts of Anna's that I've translated in the past, where you also just let it sit for a bit, and then you read the book again, and then you come back to the translated sample. And this was huge for me, spending 2 months in Austria this summer. And I mean, 2 months is not even that long, but it was that time was so valuable for me. Just to, I was applying for a grant, and I was using a sample from Anna's last novel. And so I came back to this sample that I had prepared also for Matas Insights for her publisher 2 or so years ago. And it was small things. It wasn't even anything really fatal, but that I just realized I had not caught the Austrian nuance. And unfortunately, that sounds really juicy, and I can't remember exactly what it was. It would be much more interesting to you all if I did. But it was really just kind of this feeling of the language, of the setting, of the characters, and the way they spoke and the way they interacted, where I felt after being in Vienna for 2 months, the translation just became much richer, because I felt like I was much more a writer. Because my goal, at least, and I think this is for most translators, you want the text to sound as though you have written it originally, that it was first written in your language, and that you're coming with your own experiences, but of course telling the story that the author has written, and in their voice and in their tone. And so by having that experience, I felt finally that my translation was that much more authentic, because I had not a lifetime in Austria, but at least a couple weeks. Yeah, I found that really helped.
Yeah, I think my question is going in the direction of that nuance. So when I listened correctly to what Anna wrote, I had a picture of this man on the vibration plate that was not waving to the camera but zwinkern. Was it red? So it was this really small gesture of...
Oh, it would be winking instead.
Yes, and it somehow made sense because later on where this passage comes, where she says she doesn't believe it.
Yeah.
It's this gesture that kind of makes it so, to me, clear that the context is mainly related to the man rather than...
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That was a mistake. That should be...
No. It's funny because I didn't see the text when Anna was reading it. It was this clear picture in my head, and then I saw the text. It's not really,
No, but you're absolutely right. It should, and because that's, I mean, maybe he's waving with a wink, but the wink is kind of, you know, you hear it go ding as he's winking at the camera from his vibration plate, which was also a thing that I didn't realize existed, but really does. That's absolutely right.
Sorry.
Please don't apologize. This is useful. This is great, and this often comes up in revision too, where
there's a TV Röhrengerät in German, and I wrote a short story some years ago, and basically it was the same story as the first chapter. And Liz did the translation, and you were, I can't remember what did I write, not Röhrengerät, but Standgerät?
Standgerät.
Yeah. So I'm not so good with technical terms, and so Liz was like, okay, Standgerät, so really old TV, like in the 19...
like the ones that had feet, that stand on the ground, that have feet. And so that's what I thought.
I didn't realize.
And I had done, what felt like hours of research into this Standgerät. What is a standing TV? And actually, I was remembering the TV that my grandmother had at her house. And Anna and I were then at the residency in New York last year, and we sat down, and I was like, okay, listen, I gotta ask you, like, this Standgerät, what is that? And Anna's like, interesting. I think that's a mistake. And so I wrote to the editor, because this was the story that had been printed in this online journal, and I wrote to the editor and I said, hey, sorry, it had been published months earlier, and I said, listen, sorry, I'm sitting here with the author, and it turns out she made a mistake. Can we change that in the text? And she said, well, okay, sure. If it's the author who made the mistake, we'll change that. And that was fun too. That I had read this story a year and a half or 2 years ago, and was already so intrigued by these characters of Carla and Heinz. And there, in the story, as I recall, there's not as much detail about who the narrator is, and who, like Elisabeth and Peter, don't come up as names, I believe. And it was interesting then returning to it and having the story, fleshed out much, much more. And in terms of language, there was one part that I had really liked, and it's the image of Carla chewing on the paper and inhaling and choking. And this was something that the text was actually a little bit different in the original short story.
And a cat in the shopping bag.
Yes, that was a really great detail. She encounters one of the neighbors, and she has her cat in a cloth shopping bag. Oh God!
Too many animals already there.
But in that original story, it was the image of Carla chewing the paper, laughing, inhaling, and the spitball getting stuck in her throat. And there was the line, she began to cough as the paper wad lodged in her throat. And I really, really liked the lodging in the throat. I liked the way it sounded. Sorry. Let's see where the thing is a little bit. It's at the very end. Oh, this was an earlier version where I hadn't finished it, I guess. So sorry. So she began to cough as the paper wad lodged in her throat. And the lodged in her throat part was edited out of this version. And since the author and I were sitting together and talking, we just put it back in. But you can maybe explain why it was edited out.
It was because I think it was something like, it was in her Luftröhre, like
her breathing pipe? Is that what it's called?
Windpipe.
Thanks, yeah.
Yeah, and my editor just said it doesn't work. You can't have it in there because it's in the other part.
The esophagus.
Yeah, so that's why we picked it out.
So it came down to anatomy.
Yeah.
But the throat, I think, is a nice catch-all English term there.
Yeah, and it's different than im Hals stecken.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we decided to put that back in, and it was, I think, probably the first of maybe many times where it feels really nice to have the author sitting next to you, and you can say, listen, what do you think?
Yeah.
Should we, is it okay to change this a little bit? And I figure if she says it's okay, then then others should agree.
What else?
Do we maybe want to talk about the names?
The names.
König.
König.
And the title.
Oh,
Yeah,
the title,
the
and the
title.
swan.
Yeah.
We do need to talk about the swan.
So names first?
Sure.
Yeah. Do we have something?
Oh, yeah.
So
This is
Peter, Peter's last name is König in German, which is something is
Can you
king.
make that a bit bigger on the screen?
Unfortunately,
Maybe here?
maybe if I... Oh, that's right. Yes. Thank you.
Oh, well done. Yeah, that's better. Thanks.
There you go. That is much better. So here, this spot here.
And it's through the entire text that there always often comes Peter's name König. And here is also the Vereinigtes Königreich, United Kingdom.
Because he goes to London.
He goes to London and he sends her letters and he says like, yeah, we two are going to be like the United Kingdom, but also in the sense of König, because his last name is König. So we had a problem.
Yeah. And it comes up also in this scene where he says Prinzessin, so princess, and then she says Kaiserin,
And at least,
which is empress, or at least queen, Königin, which of course then also includes the word König.
And Queen Elizabeth.
And
And our Sissi, of course. That's very hard to translate.
And this isn't the only name, of course, because Anna likes to keep it really simple. This isn't the only name that has kind of dual meanings in the text. That Fleck is one of the neighbors. Fleck, F-L-E-C-K, also means stain or spot, or sort of a dirty spot. And this is a neighbor who routinely pees in the elevator and leaves a stain and a smell. Richter, judge, and she but richten is also sort of, she's a bit of a busybody and always kind of keeping tabs on people and sees everything, waits for the mailman to come, and the mailman has to kind of hold her away from the mailboxes so she doesn't see what everyone's getting. And with König, especially because it's one of the main two characters, well, there are others, but one of the main characters, and because it comes up so often, and because it would be kind of a simple translation into king and could work with United Kingdom, but it's tough then, of course, my God, and King is a surname in English too, so I'm almost tempted to think, well, maybe in this case we make sort of an exception to the rule and change a proper name so that the wordplay also works. I know, but that's my reaction to, oof, I don't know. Yeah. And then there's another spot in the text. 125?
Yeah.
Have you decided yet whether you will change the name?
No. What do you all think?
Oh, I see. So if you became Mr. King,
He'd sound like an English person.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the problem.
I wouldn't change the name.
I mean, I'd be strongly tempted, but yeah, what we need, I suppose, how Austrian is the story overall?
Yeah.
That's what we don't know.
Say rather Austrian. Yeah.
Well, you could change all the names to English names.
Oh,
but no.
What did Malakoff talk about?
I think the reality is that people will just look things up nowadays if they don't know the meaning and they're interested, so you can just leave it in the German.
But they may not think that the names have any meaning.
Well, König, I mean, it's easy, isn't it? Princessin, it's like not a problem. So they might not get Richter necessarily, but...
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think that there we may have kind of dodged a bullet because König is close enough. It's not quite a cognate, but it is close enough. Also, the way it appears and the K. I mean, that helps a lot. And so then, here they're putting up signs by the doorbells, and they misspell it by leaving out the umlaut, and so König becomes König. And but I mean that then I would really have painted myself into a corner if I translated it into king, because then what am I going to do? Leave the dog? Yeah.
Did Magda have a meaning for you? The name?
No. Okay. Did it have meaning for you?
I'd only started asking myself since you've talked about all the names.
Yeah. But yeah, just as another example of some little questions that you then ask yourself as you're going through and deciding how significant a change you want to make to the text. And there I agree, I'm gonna not touch the last name. I'm not going to change that.
Yeah. And we also had like on the very first page.
Yeah, this is
was it very first? No, the fourth page or so.
Yeah. So then another. This was a really tough one for me. Another play on words. Based on misunderstandings. Someone says something, you don't really, you're not sure if you've misheard, and this was also on my original sheet. Lege and lebe. Ich lebe hier. Ich lege hier. I'm so sorry for the scrolling while I try to find this. Here we go. I'll stay here, I'll lay here. And what made me very nervous about this part is having an English reader think that I'm misusing lay and lie. Because if you say I'm laying here or I lay here, then your grammar's wrong. But it's wrong in the German too, because legen is also a transitive verb. You leg something hin, you lay something down. And so again, I went to Anna and I was like, so, what's the deal? Why would you put this in there? And what was your explanation?
I can't remember.
I don't think you had one.
It's about misunderstanding.
It's mishearing. That it's Riesen and Wiesen. So it's just the sound, isn't it?
Yeah.
But here you could.
Giants and plants. We're not giants anymore. There aren't plants like before. Because it's also, he would nod just the same, but maybe think she was too attached to the past. That was a play on words that then also extended into what might be kind of the deeper meaning behind the misunderstanding and why she might be afraid that he would misunderstand. And it's not perfect. The giants and plants I find a little bit, I'm not sure that would really be a misunderstanding, but but maybe.
I find, can I just say something?
Sure,
I find
please.
that word saying people mishear and don't ask. That's it's mishear. I mean, wouldn't that's for me a strange word, really.
To mishear something?
Yeah, mishear. It doesn't sound nice. Don't understand would probably be a better fiction.
It's mishear US.
Wasn't it?
It's American.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it?
Is it?
It sounds like a perfectly normal word that
To me
I've
as
grown up
well,
with all my
yeah.
life. I'm sorry.
I misheard.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I wouldn't have known that it was perhaps US English.
I don't think it is.
Well, if I were, I mean,
Also, there's a difference between mishearing something and not understanding something.
Yeah.
And I think that makes quite a clear difference.
Yeah.
Mishear.
Just hear something. I mishear stuff all the time.
In the original language. Yeah.
We've got about 10 more minutes. I was wondering if you want to talk about the title.
Yeah,
just
please.
because I think it
Please
is
talk about the title.
a very good title.
Find a swan boat. So
nearly finished. Yes.
I've written 3 novels so far, and my plan was, okay, this one has to be without an animal in the title. And, then I just had the title, and I thought it just fits. It's just I couldn't do anything else, and there's a story behind it. There was a swan in Germany, close to Münster, and it fell in love with a plastic boat. It really happened.
It was in all the
years ago.
papers.
Yeah, a black swan, and she stayed in a relationship with her boat for 2 years, and then she disappeared, and they didn't find her for some years, but then they found her again, and I think she was in love with the swan, but her son fell in love with a duck. It's quite a story. It's just Magda, Peter's sister. She tells the story about a swan. She just had comes to their house and tells what went wrong in her relationship, and so the story is about, I don't know, illusion, about to fall in love with somebody or to think something else about somebody, and so there's a swan, and I hope the next one will be without an animal.
What I love about the title is that it's so polyvalent, because I mean, it can be good that the swan finds a boat, or it can be just a sign of going completely wrong. And it sort of keeps the balance. I found the same with Clemens Setz, another Austrian writer, Der Trost runder Dinge. It's that the whole thing is oblique. You don't know if it's good that they give you comfort or not, and and it was the same, and you have to find the story in the book. It's only a short passage, and if you don't read carefully you can easily miss it. So I thought that was very nice. I don't know if there are any more questions, or we could slowly.
Well, I didn't realize really what trouble you take until a book has been translated. But the average reader, would it really, do you think they're there with their really sharp spectacle to analyze really? I think maybe it's just a professional on top, your editor and your verleger, they probably make sure that it has to be. But I would be, if I would be a translator and I have to translate a book, and I find out that some of the words are a bit tricky to translate, I would go back to the writer and say, no, I got difficult here. Possibly, could you maybe find another word? Why don't you try that next time?
Yeah, it's good. I've got her number. I can
find another word for mishear.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, translation is a hugely complicated, and there are so many possible approaches that is behind this series and many books written about
Well,
it.
the lesson is to read a book always in his original language.
Especially English people don't very often speak those languages.
Yeah.
I just want to make one point and then shut up. But we had a conference about locations and how, so few books get translated into English from small languages, from German only about 5% of the whole cake. And we found that it is easier to get a first book translated if it is set in a well-known location. That often people break into the market having books set in Manhattan or Berlin or Vienna, and then subsequent books are more regional. So this may be actually a difficulty with this book. Although it could be any small town, really.
And we were discussing this earlier too, because I am hoping to pitch this book at a conference coming up soon in the States, and we were discussing whether I should try pitching this book or the last book. And I think, in fact, really for that reason, the last book, which I also loved and encourage everyone to read, and I hope it will also be available in English at some point, is set in Austria as well, but in the mountains of Austria, in a small ski town, where it's really quite specific. There are certainly universal themes also to be drawn from it, and I think that it would do well in other places, but it is a bit more specific to what small town life in an isolated Austrian ski village
without snow
is like. And again, great images, but I think that this, because it deals with political themes as well, it's very current in that way. And I think because it's in a town also sort of unknown, but I think that this, for that reason, might in fact be kind of an easier sell as a first book to be translated into English and published.
Well, it makes sell for me. I don't know another book with the same temporal structure. It's really unique. And it's not long. It actually does tell a story.
Yeah.
So I think it has a good chance. I hope so.
I hope so too. Yeah.
Have you translated in Africa? Are you more or less for the Western world, your books, or do they go to Africa or Japan? I'm just thinking what other nation might react to your book.
The last one, The Starfish, has been translated into Arabic and Tajik. So I don't know, maybe there's some interest in mountains. But it's also about society, of course, and how
Tajikistan.
Yeah. Yeah, but not published.
Because I went once, a long time ago, to the British library at the night of European literature, and there was Kate Moss, and she said one of her books were translated, and when Kate Moss read it later on, she thought it was a complete different book. So that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I can't read the Arabic translation, so I don't know.
A lot more trust in the translator then.
Yeah.
She can check my work.
Did you have interaction with the Arabic translator?
No, not at all.
No question.
Well, I hope the Austrian Culture Center will have it in your library. Have you?
Yes.
Her books? So I
And they're here as well now. We've ordered them. Yeah.
Oh, that was really interesting. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Oh, Gisela can have the last word, because that's the tradition.
It was a pleasure for me to go to the French cinema to see Alain Delon, which was a nice film. They introduced by somebody from the King's College, but no, I thought I support the German or Austrian literature.
Thank you.